Gentlemen, tell us who you are.
I'm Don Woerner. I'm a local veterinarian in this area.
We call him Doc Woerner. Doc Woerner. And I'm Mike Penfold.
Well, first of all, thank you for coming down to sit alongside the Yellowstone River. I would like you two to just talk to each other and tell me some stories. That's really all I want you to do.
Okay. How much time have we got, Bill? So let's see. Don, let me ask you, what got you interested in the Bozeman Trail? You were working on it a lot sooner than I was.
Well, I think it was flying that got me interested in the trail, because I started seeing things from the air. One of the biggest things I saw was Fort Smith, the actual fort. When you go there, there's a few little bits of material standing up, but you can't really recognize the fort. But when you're up in the air, you can see the whole outline. And what is this? This is an old fort, and found out it was a fort on the Bozeman Trail. And then one thing led to another, and ran into a person that introduced me to Susan Badger Doyle, and Susan was doing research for her PhD, I believe, on diaries of the Bozeman Trail, and it was very interesting. And we got to talking and got a chance to fly the trail and look for evidence of wagon tracks and that type of thing.
Don, I was sitting here along the Yellowstone River. I'm trying to think what the name of the wagon train was that came through here in 1874. I think maybe it was the Hurlbut train. And they came down through the South Hills over here. Actually, they came down where Pictograph Cave is. And they came all the way down to the river, and then they looked up the river. Well, the river was too big to get across. And they looked up the river, and here's these big black bluffs that they couldn't get by. So they had to go way back on up the country and then come down through that Billings Motorcycle Club area there. And they got down here someplace. And I think they camped right where we are. And one of the stories that I got a kick out in reading those diaries that you got from Susan Badger Doyle is that they had a lot of dogs on the wagon train, and when they got about right here, they were camped, and some of the dogs scared the cattle being oxen that they were using to pull the heavy mining equipment and so on. And the cattle stampeded. A couple of women were almost hurt, and the wagons were broken up, and so it was a big deal. Those darn dogs had caused some problems. So of course, what do? They all get together, and just like we do today when somebody's got a problem dog, and they decided that the dogs should be killed. The wagon master, the captain of the train, said, well, we're going to kill the dogs. And of course the people said, no, I'm not killing my dog. And
that's what I'd say.
Come here, Penny. That's what we'd say too. Yeah, we wouldn't let that happen.
No way, Penny.
So, at any rate, they decided to split up the train, one part of the train would have dogs, the other part wouldn't. And that, matter of fact, they did split the train, and they bumped into each other as they went along the trail. It's kind of a neat place right here, because you know, 1864, if we were sitting here in that summertime, it'd been hot, and you could smell those cattle, you could see the wagons, people discussing getting together. And this was Indian country back in those days, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. And the Indians been pushed around enough to where they didn't want to be pushed anymore, and they were going to keep this country. This is where they got their resource, the buffalo. This is how they lived. And they were promised this country, and they weren't about ready to allow us to go back on our route.
No.
And I don't blame them a bit. I'm glad they didn't kill the dogs. That would make me feel really bad, because a dog is doing what a dog's supposed to do, and we figure out another way to deal with this problem.
When they came down through what we call the South Hills now, they looked across the valley over where Billings is right now, right over there. And the place was covered with buffalo and elk. I mean, that prairie land over there was just covered. And there they're not there now. We've got a lot of people there now, don't we?
We do,
Yeah.
we do, and it's a rich valley, lots of good farming. However, the farming is due to irrigation, because we got some big irrigation, and that helped to make it possible to farm it. Before that, it was good grass country, and there were buffalo all over. And even earlier, when Lewis and Clark came through here, they mentioned the buffalo, and they mentioned their horses seeing the buffalo, and people from the top of the ridge out here, as they came into the valley, could see them.
You know where Clark crossed the horses is just about a mile down below us here. Sergeant Pryor brought Clark's horses, and they crossed the river right down. We got the island name there, Clark's Crossing Island. Although Clark didn't really cross there, Sergeant Pryor did.
Right. Sergeant Pryor, and he was in charge of the horse herd, and he had about 3 other guys that were with him. They were trying to keep their horses. They had a bunch of loose horses, and they were riding horses, and they were trying to keep them all together. When they finally got crossed away from the buffalo, they went up through those hills, and the plan was to meet clear back in the villages, the Indian villages, way further to the east of here.
Those Mandan villages.
Right, the Mandan villages.
Yeah.
Well, they only got about 20 miles, I think, and they ran into a heck of a rainstorm, and they were camped on a kind of a dry, mostly dry river creek bank, and that, as I understand, that filled with water through the night as the rain ran, and their horses ended up disappearing. So they were set afoot. They didn't have any horses, and they weren't with Clark, so they ended up walking to the Yellowstone River, walking north, and building a boat down there on the river out of an old buffalo hide, and not an old buffalo hide, one that they harvested, and I think they built a couple of boats and floated down the river. But those kind of things are, what happened in this country through the years. It's fascinating.
Not far from here, Don. So they came down to here, where Blue Creek comes into the Yellowstone River. Then they went up Blue Creek, and then there's a kind of an easy path to get up on top of these ridges right over here, which are above the Yellowstone River. And then they came down into Duck Creek, and they went on up to the Clark's Fork, along the Clark's Fork River, and that's where they ran into Jim Bridger's trail.
Right. Jim Bridger's trail came in from the south.
Yeah, and
Right there.
crossed about at Edgar,
Mm-hmm.
and then over
And the trails converged.
trails converged, and over to Joliet and Absaroka, and they were going through some pretty fine country then, weren't they?
Oh, beautiful country. Lots of nice, cool, sparkling, clear water. Easy daily trips. It must have been a really fun part of their trip, I would think. I would think that type of travel, they get tired of it for over a long period of time, but I'll bet they enjoyed that part.
Felt a little safer in this country too. This was Crow country here, and they didn't feel as threatened, did they?
No.
As much as they were on the other side of the Prairie Mountains and along the Bighorns.
The Sioux and the Arapaho, the Cheyenne, they were ticked off. It started with one of the big things was that Sand Creek massacre in Colorado. It got the people very upset, Southern Cheyennes, and this was the country that was promised to them, and then here come these guys through the middle of it with a wagon train and the military force there, and they felt they were betrayed, and they were.
You know, the thing too is the people coming through here were really not interested in settling here. They were trying to get through to the gold fields, weren't they? And all they wanted to let us get through here. We're not trying to bother you. But after that, there was other people coming who did want to settle.
Right.
With cattle herds and Nelson
bet.
Story and our favorite movie, The Lonesome Dove, kind of tells that story. Huh?
It does. Yeah, I mean, the Lonesome Dove's fiction, but it's fiction based on fact, and it tells quite a story of people, going to Texas buying a cattle herd and organizing a group of men, buying the rifles to defend yourself. And Story was that way his whole life. He was an amazing individual, and it's fun to have that as part of our Bozeman Trail legacy, I guess you might say. And then people realized when they came through here how pretty this country was, and they started to drift back, and we got squatters in here, and of course it was still pretty. You're taking a lot of chances when you came down here, but gradually this country got settled up, and this is some of the prettiest country,
Exactly.
as far as I'm concerned.